The letter arrived without ceremony. No fleet escort, no diplomatic vessel painted in gold, just a standard data packet routed through 3 relay stations, stamped with the Galactic Council's seal and dropped into Earth's government inbox like a piece of unwanted mail. It had been 300 years since first contact. In all that time, humanity had sent 47 formal applications for full council membership. Each one had been rejected. The reasons changed every few decades, but the answer never did. This time, the council was inviting humanity to come and ask in person. Ambassador Relk of the Vordon sat in his curved office on Halcyon Prime and watched the confirmation read receipt blink green. He folded his 4-fingered hands and smiled at his aide, a young Vordon named Wick, who was reviewing the same message on a side screen. "They will send someone nervous," Relk said. "Someone who wants to make a good impression. They will prepare speeches. They will practice being polite." Wick nodded. "And the assembly will listen, reject the application on developmental grounds, and that will be the end of it for another 50 years. Precisely. What Relk did not know, and what he had never bothered to find out, was that Earth did not have nervous diplomats anymore. That particular personality type had been bred out of the diplomatic corps after the 22nd rejection, somewhere around the year 2180. The people Earth sent into space now were engineers first. They thought in systems. They thought in outcomes. They did not practice speeches. They ran simulations. The woman who read the council's invitation was not standing at a podium. She was in a shipyard, in a gray coverall, holding a datapad in one hand and a coolant wrench in the other. Her name was Dara Osai. She was 44 years old. She had spent the last 11 years overseeing a construction project so large and so carefully hidden that even Earth's own public did not know its full scope. She read the invitation twice. Then she sent a single-line message to her colleague, Dr. Fen Aseji, who was 3 levels below her in the same shipyard. The message said, "It's time." Fen was a small, quiet man who rarely spoke in meetings and kept his office walls completely bare. He read the message, set down his coffee, and walked to the central console of the facility. He pulled up a status board that showed 17 columns of data. Every column was green. He sent back one word, "Ready." That same week, across the galaxy on Halcyon Prime, Counselor Arin of the Thessari species was doing something her colleagues would have considered a waste of time. She was reading humanity's file. Not the summary, not the rejection history. The actual file, 300 years deep, cross-referenced against the Council's own internal trade restriction logs. What she found made her uncomfortable. Every energy estimate the Council had on record for Earth was based on surveys done more than 80 years ago. Every industrial capacity report was built on data from observation drones that had been quietly recalled after budget cuts. The Council had not conducted a proper survey of Earth's capabilities in almost a century. They had simply assumed that humanity, shut out of galactic trade agreements and denied access to cooperative research networks, had fallen behind. Arin flagged the discrepancy in an internal report and sent it to Ambassador Relk's office. The report sat unread for 6 days. Back on Earth, the Ardent was being prepared for departure. It was not a remarkable ship to look at. It was mid-sized, gray-hulled, with standard docking configurations and a modest engine signature. Anyone scanning it from a distance would see exactly what they expected to see: a diplomatic transport from a developing world, trying its best. Dara walked its corridors the night before launch. She checked the cargo manifest, which listed survey equipment, cultural demonstration materials, and 112 crew members. The manifest was accurate as far as it went. It did not list what was anchored in the ship's lower decks under 3 layers of sensor shielding, because those things were not cargo. They were contingencies. Admiral Prest met her at the lower deck hatch. He was a broad-shouldered man with gray at his temples and a very even voice. He had commanded Earth's orbital defense operations for 12 years and was not given to unnecessary speech. "Fleet is positioned," he said. "Fold coordinates locked. They will not see us until we choose to be seen." "Keep them quiet," Dara said. "No active scanning, nothing that registers on Council sensors." "Understood." She stood there for a moment, looking at the hatch. On the other side of it was everything humanity had built in 3 centuries of enforced silence. She did not feel triumphant. She felt something closer to tired, the specific tiredness of a person who has been waiting a very long time and can finally see the end of the wait. The Ardent launched the next morning into a clear orbital sky. Earth traffic control logged its departure. Long-range Council observation posts near the solar system noted a single diplomatic vessel leaving Earth's orbit, heading for Halcyon Prime, traveling at standard speed. Nothing about it seemed worth watching. That was, of course, the point. In his office on Halcyon Prime, Ambassador Relk had already moved on to other business. The human application would be handled, dismissed, and filed. The galaxy would remain as it was. It always did. He did not read Aaron's report until 4 days later. The same morning the Ardent requested a docking bay at Halcyon Prime. He read it once, then he read it again. Then he set it down and told himself it was old data. It had to be old data. The alternative was something he was not prepared to consider. Not yet. The docking bay they assigned the Ardent was Bay 91C. It was the smallest available slot on Halcyon Prime, tucked between a waste processing conduit and a maintenance corridor that smelled of coolant. The automated system offered it without comment. Dara accepted it without complaint. She watched the bay doors close around the ship and turned back to her team, who were already organizing themselves with the quiet efficiency of people who had rehearsed this moment for years. "Dress formal," she said. "Nothing military. Leave the rank insignia in your bags." There were 12 of them in the diplomatic party. Engineers, data analysts, 2 historians, 1 linguist, and Dara. No lawyers. Earth had stopped sending lawyers to Council sessions after the 9th rejection, when it became clear that the Council's legal framework had been specifically designed to exclude species it did not want included. They rode a transit pod to the main hub of Halcyon Prime. The station was enormous, a rotating disk 4 kilometers wide, housing more than 60,000 permanent residents and twice that in transient delegates during assembly sessions. The corridors were wide and lit in the blue-white spectrum that most Council species preferred. It made the walls look cold. Dara noticed 3 separate security scans between the docking ring and the assembly entrance. She said nothing. Her team said nothing. They walked through each one with their identification displayed and their faces neutral. The Grand Assembly Chamber was designed to impress, and it succeeded. It was a hemisphere nearly 200 meters across, with tiered seating arranged in concentric rings around a central speaking floor. Every seat had a translation console and a personal display screen. The ceiling was transparent, showing open space above, and the stars looked close enough to touch. The human delegation was seated in the outermost ring, the furthest seats from the speaking floor. Dara noted this and sat down. The session opened with 3 hours of procedural business that had nothing to do with Earth, trade renegotiations between the Grevari and the Ulfine, a boundary dispute in the 7th Arm, a motion to create a subcommittee on subcommittee formation. Dara sat through all of it. Her team sat through all of it. Nobody slouched. Nobody checked a private screen. Then came the historical context presentation. It was Ambassador Relk who stood at the speaking floor, and he had clearly prepared. The holographic display behind him showed Earth, rotating slowly, while a calm narrator voice described humanity's last 3 centuries in careful, factual language. The wars were shown. The ecological collapses were shown. The period called the fracture years, when 7 separate human governments had pointed weapons at each other across 3 different continents, was shown in particular detail. The hall watched with the polite attention of people watching something they already knew the ending of. Dara watched the display, She recognized the footage. Some of it was genuine. Some of it was sourced from entertainment programs Earth had broadcast into space 2 centuries ago, fictional dramas that the Council had cataloged as historical records. She noted this in her head and said nothing. When Relk finished, he turned toward the human delegation and gave a small, formal nod. It was the nod of someone who had already decided the outcome. The Grevari representative, a wide-bodied creature named Brath, immediately filed a procedural motion. He proposed that Earth's membership application be suspended pending a third-party developmental review to be conducted over a period of not less than 25 years. He cited the historical context presentation as the basis. The motion required a simple majority to pass. The vote opened. Dara did not look at the count. She looked at Counselor Aaron, who was sitting in the fourth ring, holding her stylus very still, staring at the vote screen with the expression of someone doing difficult arithmetic in their head. The count reached 50% in favor. Then it stopped. Aaron pressed her vote. Against. The motion failed by 1 vote. A quiet sound moved through the chamber, not quite a murmur, more like the collective intake of breath from 200 different respiratory systems. Relk's head turned toward Aaron with a slowness that was not casual. Aaron looked at her screen and not at him. High Arbiter San, ancient and still and wrapped in the formal gray of his position, called the chamber back to order. His voice had the quality of something that had been used to quiet large rooms for a very long time. "The floor is open," he said, "to the representative of Earth." Dara stood. The chamber settled. She could feel the attention of 200 alien minds, most of them certain they already knew what she was going to say. She spoke for 20 seconds. She said that Earth was grateful for the time. She said that humanity had prepared something for the assembly, not an argument, not a speech, but a demonstration. She said that words had been tried for 300 years, and she saw no reason to add more of them today. Then she asked, politely but without any particular softness, whether the assembly would be willing to move to the outer observation deck. The chamber did not know what to do with this. Relk leaned to his aide and said quietly that it was a stunt, that there was nothing a species at Earth's level could show the galaxy that would change a single vote. His aide agreed. High Arbiter San looked at Dara for a long moment, then at the chamber, then back at Dara. Something in her stillness made him pause. "The assembly will recess to the outer observation deck," he said. 200 beings stood and moved toward the corridor. Some were curious. Most were indifferent. A few were already composing their rejection speeches. None of them were prepared. Dara sent one encrypted pulse to the Ardent as she walked. It contained 2 characters. Go. The outer observation deck of Halcyon Prime was designed for scenic viewing. It wrapped the upper edge of the station like a glass collar, 300 meters of transparent steel curving outward over open space. On clear days, which in space meant every day, you could see the gas giant the station orbited, its slow orange rings turning in the distance. It was a beautiful view. Delegates used it for private conversations and informal diplomacy. Nobody had ever used it for a weapons demonstration, though some of the older council members were beginning to suspect that was what this was. 212 beings arranged themselves along the railing. Dara stood at the far left end, near the section closest to the docking ring where the Ardent was parked. Her team stood behind her. None of them were looking at the gas giant. Ambassador Relk positioned himself near the center of the deck, where he had a full view of the bay in which the human ship sat. He had already decided that whatever was about to happen, it would be small. A light show, maybe. Some kind of display meant to imply things the humans did not actually have. For 40 seconds, nothing happened. Then the Ardent moved. Not toward the station. Away from it slowly at first, clearing the docking ring, moving out into clean space. Its engine signature was normal. Its speed was normal. Several of the alien engineers on the deck watched it with mild interest and then looked back toward open space, waiting for whatever the demonstration was supposed to be. The Ardent stopped at 300 kilometers out. Then the sky changed. There was no sound in space, but the human observers on the deck knew the exact moment it happened because Dara closed her eyes briefly, the way a person does when they hear a piece of music they have been waiting years to hear again. 17 vessels dropped into real space simultaneously. Not one at a time, not in sequence. All 17 at once at exact intervals around the station, as though they had been placed by a careful hand. Each one was large. Not large in the way that a cargo freighter is large. Large in the way that a city block is large if you were standing at street level. They were angular and dark-hulled with no visible engine arrays, no glowing nacelles, no exhaust ports. They simply appeared and then stayed exactly where they were, motionless, without any visible effort to maintain position. The observation deck went silent in a way that had nothing to do with space. One of the Grevari engineers, a specialist in propulsion systems named Orath, gripped the railing hard enough that the synthetic material creaked. He had spent 40 years studying fold space entry signatures. What he had just seen was not possible. A single ship entering fold space left a detectable energy bloom that lasted several seconds. 17 ships entering simultaneously would have produced a bloom visible from 6 star systems away. There had been no bloom. There had been nothing. They simply were not there, and then they were. "That is not fold space," he said to nobody in particular. Nobody answered him. The second phase began without announcement. The 17 ships moved. This was the part that broke something in Aaron. She was not an engineer. She was a diplomat and a political historian, and she understood ships the way anyone understands things they have studied but never built. She knew what a ship moving in space was supposed to look like. She knew about thrust vectors and inertia and the basic physical reality that large objects required force and time to change direction. The human ships did not change direction. They repositioned, all 17, into a new formation, and the repositioning took the same amount of time it would have taken someone to rearrange pieces on a game board with their hand. There was no acceleration curve, no drift. They moved and then they were in the new position, as though the space between the 2 points had simply agreed to be smaller. Counselor Aaron turned and looked at Dara. Dara was looking out at the ships. Her expression was steady. She had seen this before. She had watched this specific test from this specific angle 11 times in the last 3 years. The third phase was the one that made High Arbiter San step back from the railing. The lead vessel, the largest of the 17, activated something. There was no visible change in the ship itself, but every sensor on Halcyon Prime registered a power output that their systems immediately flagged as a reading error because the numbers were not physically reasonable. The station's chief technical officer, sitting in the monitoring room, ran a manual recheck of the sensors. The sensors were fine. The reading was correct. The power output was equivalent to 44 combined fleets. It held for 60 seconds, clean and controlled, and then it cut off completely. No fade, no wind down, off. Then, on every screen on Halcyon Prime, the same message appeared in all 61 registered languages simultaneously, slipping past the station's encryption systems without triggering a single alarm. It said, "We have been patient, we remain patient, but we are no longer what you assumed." The observation deck was silent for a long time after that. Relk turned to look at Dara. She was already looking at him. She was not smiling. She was not angry. She had the steady, unhurried expression of someone who had finished a job they had been working on for a very long time and simply needed it to be acknowledged. Relk looked back at the 17 dark ships, motionless in the void. For the first time in 40 years of council politics, he had nothing to say. The emergency session convened without the human delegation. This was not unusual. The council had held hundreds of closed sessions in its 4,000-year history. Typically, when something needed to be decided before it became public knowledge, what was unusual was the noise. Council sessions were governed by procedure. Procedure meant order, and order meant no one raised their voice above a formal register. Within 6 minutes of the session opening, 3 members were talking at the same time. Relk let them go for a while. He sat at the head of the crescent table and watched his colleagues argue and calculated. 2 of the senior members were already leaning forward with the particular posture of people who had begun reassessing their position. One of them, Councillor Drain of the Ulfine, had already sent a private message to his government's trade office. Relk had seen the notification flash on Drain's wrist console. He had said nothing. When the shouting reached a peak, Relk pressed the table's tone control. The room quieted. "We have 3 problems," he said. "The first is what we just saw. The second is that everyone on that observation deck saw it with us. The third is that we do not know how much more they have." The intelligence reports began arriving within the hour. They were bad. Earth's energy output, resurveyed in real time using the station's long-range instruments, was 40 times higher than Council records indicated. The construction signatures they were now detecting near Earth's outer system had been generating for decades. The Council's observation posts had missed them because they were calibrated to look for drive signatures and material transport patterns consistent with standard galactic technology. Whatever humanity had been building, it had a completely different signature. It was not that the humans had hidden it badly. It was that the Council had been looking for the wrong thing entirely. Relk read this report and set it face down on the table. Meanwhile, in a small meeting room 2 levels below the assembly chamber, Councillor Arin sat across from Dara Osai. This meeting had not been scheduled. Arin had sent a private request. Dara had agreed to it in the same tone she agreed to everything, which was to say, without surprise. They had tea. Arin had brought it herself. It was a Thessari blend, very pale with a faint mineral taste. Dara drank it without comment. "I need to ask you something directly," Arin said. "Go ahead. Did you always have this, or did we make you build it?" Dara looked at her tea for a moment. Then she said, "Both." Arin thought about that. The Council denied every cooperative research request Earth submitted for 160 years. We denied access to the shared materials network. We put trade restrictions on any species that sold advanced propulsion components to your markets. Yes. We thought we were limiting your development. Dara looked up. "You were for a while." She set down the cup. "And then we stopped waiting for permission." Arin was quiet for a long moment. Outside the small room, through the corridor walls, she could hear the faint hum of the station systems. Somewhere above them, 200 council members were trying to find a way to undo what they had seen. She already knew they could not. "What do you actually want?" Arin asked. "Not the official answer. What does Earth actually want from this?" Dara thought about the question as though it were not a simple one. "The same thing we asked for in the first application in 2214, access to cooperative research, equal standing in trade negotiations, protection under the Galactic Compact, a vote." She paused. "We don't want to run anything. We are not interested in replacing the Council with something human-shaped. We want a seat at the table that our species actually earns." Back upstairs, Relk was learning that things were moving faster than he had planned. The Grevari delegation had formally requested a private meeting with the human team. The Drain faction had gone quiet in the session, which meant they were having conversations outside it. 2 smaller species, the Velhari and the An, had submitted a joint proposal to the Arbiter's office requesting a special session on membership reform. His aide Wick brought him each update on a physical card, an old habit. Electronic messages left records. Relk read the cards one by one and lined them up on his desk. He had built his position on the council over 30 years through alliances and procedural knowledge, and the skill of making people feel that the current arrangement was simply the natural order, too old and stable to question. He was very good at this. What he had not planned for was the natural order being wrong. Not morally wrong. He meant wrong in the technical sense, like a structural calculation built on a false load estimate. Every alliance he had built rested on the assumption that humanity was manageable. That assumption was now false, and everything built on top of it was sitting on open air. He lined up the last card on his desk and looked at the row of them. Then he did something he had not done in 30 years of council politics. He sat still and said nothing and simply thought. Admiral Prest, aboard the lead vessel of the human fleet, reported to Dara that evening by secure line. All 17 ships were holding position. No council military vessel had come within 200 kilometers. They had been scanned 14 times in the past 4 hours. Passive scans only, Prest said. They are looking, they are not moving. Keep the fleet still, Dara said. Do not power down anything, do not acknowledge the scans. Understood, a pause, they're scared. I know, she said. That's not what we want, give it time. Nobody told the delegates to fill every seat. They did it on their own. Word had spread through Halcyon Prime the way things spread in closed political environments, through aides, through corridor conversations, through the specific body language of people who had seen something they could not explain and needed to be in the room when it was explained. By the time High Arbiter San called the Grand Assembly back to order, every seat in the chamber was occupied. There were beings standing along the back wall. San looked at the room. Then he looked at Dara, who was in the same outer ring seat she had been in 2 days ago, dressed in the same gray formal wear, with the same 12-person delegation behind her. The floor, he said, is open to the representative of Earth. No time limit has been set. Dara walked to the speaking floor. She did not have notes. She did not have a display prepared. She stood in the center of the chamber and looked at the room for a moment in a way that was not dramatic. She was simply looking, taking it in. Then she began. She did not start with Earth's achievements. She started with a document. Specifically, she read the title of the first formal application Earth had submitted for Council membership in the year 2214. She read the rejection reason, developmental immaturity. She read the second application, 2251. Rejection reason, insufficient stability indicators. She continued. She did not read all 47. She read 9. Carefully chosen ones, spread across 3 centuries, each with a different rejection reason written in the Council's own formal language. Then she put the list away. We were told, she said, in language that was always polite and always final, that we were not ready. We were told this while being denied access to the research networks that would have helped us develop faster. We were told this while trade restrictions were placed on any species that sold us materials above a certain technological threshold. We were told this while Council observation posts near our system filed reports that our government was never shown. She paused. I have all of those reports. If the Assembly would like to review them, they are available. Nobody moved. She spoke for 40 minutes. She did not raise her voice once. She described what 3 centuries of deliberate exclusion looks like from the inside, not in emotional terms but in operational ones. She talked about the generation of engineers who had grown up knowing the Council existed and knowing it would never help them. She talked about what that generation built instead. She was specific. She gave numbers and dates and project names. Then she said the thing she had been saving. We are not the most dangerous thing you have ignored. We are simply the first one to introduce itself. The chamber held that sentence for several seconds. Ambassador Relk stood. His voice was controlled but only just. He formally accused the human delegation of coercive military intimidation, citing the 17-ship fleet as a hostile deployment designed to pressure the Assembly's vote. He called for an immediate motion to remove the human delegation from the station and suspend the application. Dara waited for him to finish. The Council's own military fleet, she said, has had 6 vessels positioned within 400 kilometers of this station since the morning after our demonstration. Our ships have not moved, have not powered their weapons systems, and have not sent a single active scan toward this station. She looked at Relk directly. With respect, I ask the Assembly to consider which party in this room has deployed a military presence in response to a diplomatic visit. Relk sat down. San watched this exchange with the careful stillness of a very old being who had learned to read rooms accurately. He had been High Arbiter for 51 years. He had seen political theater and genuine crisis, and everything between them. What he was watching now was not theater. Dr. Fen Aseji, from the Ardent's communications deck, transmitted a secondary data packet to every terminal in the assembly hall. It contained complete technical schematics for humanity's atmospheric water reclamation system, a technology Earth had developed 30 years ago when the Council's trade restrictions had cut off access to the standard imported filtration components that 3 continents depended on. The humans had solved the problem themselves. The solution was elegant and cheap and required no rare materials. 6 of the species currently represented in the Assembly were dealing with planetary water shortages. The data was free. One of the delegates opened the file, read 3 pages, and put both hands over her face. Relk looked at the packet notification on his screen and did not open it. 4 council members formally announced they were changing their votes to support immediate membership. Then 2 more. Then one who had never publicly opposed it but had always voted with Relk's bloc, and who now looked at Relk with an expression that was not hostile but was finished. San let the room settle, then he called the vote. Relk looked at the count and felt something he recognized from a very long time ago, from the first council session he had ever attended, before he had learned how to shape outcomes. He felt like someone watching a thing happen that he had no part in causing and no power to stop. The count moved steadily in one direction. It did not stop. The final count was 187 in favor, 14 opposed, 6 abstentions. San read it aloud from the arbiter's podium in a voice that had no particular color in it. He was not celebrating. He was not mourning. He was doing his job, which was to record what happened and make it official. After he read the numbers, he said Earth was now a full member of the Galactic Council, with voting rights, equal standing under the Compact, and all associated protections effective immediately. Then he closed the session. The chamber did not erupt. There was no cheering from the alien gallery. What happened was more like a slow release of pressure, a sound like a very large room exhaling. Representatives turned to each other and began talking in their own languages, and the noise of it built gradually into something that was less celebration than recalibration. Dara stood at her seat in the outer ring for a moment. Then she sat back down, pulled out her datapad, and began writing a message to Earth's government. Relk was gone before the session formally ended. His aide Wick watched him leave from the corridor entrance and did not follow. There was nothing to follow to. Relk's resignation reached the arbiter's office 12 minutes later. It was 6 sentences long and contained no explanation. He had always believed that a politician who needed to explain a resignation had already made a second mistake. He did not pass through the observation deck on the way to his transport. Councillor Arin found Fen Aseji in the Ardent's open engineering bay that afternoon. He had invited several alien engineers aboard for a technical tour, which had not been announced and had no official status. It had simply happened, the way things happen when curious people are in proximity to things they do not understand. The bay was crowded with beings of 4 different species, all of them looking at components that none of their civilizations had designed, asking questions that Fen answered patiently, one at a time, in plain language. Arin stood at the entrance for a while before he noticed her. "You built all of this because you had to," she said when he walked over. It was not quite a question. "We built some of it because we had to," Finn said. "The water systems, the reclamation tech, the early drive work. We had problems that needed solving and nothing to buy." He looked back at the bay. "But after a while, the problems weren't the reason anymore. We just wanted to see how far we could get." "How far did you get?" He smiled. It was a small, private kind of smile, far enough. In the weeks that followed, things changed in the way that large things change, not all at once, but in accumulating detail. The ON formally requested a joint engineering exchange with Earth, focused on atmospheric water recovery. Humanity's team was on the ground within 3 weeks. The Velhari, who had been quietly suppressed in council trade negotiations for a century, used the new voting structure to push through a resource-sharing agreement that had been blocked for 30 years. 3 other minor species filed for membership reviews. 2 of them were fast-tracked. Earth's full council seat came with a security detail that the compact required all full members to maintain on Halcyon Prime. Admiral Prest quietly moved 2 ships into standard orbital positions around the station. They were smaller vessels, nothing like the 17 from the demonstration. Nobody mistook this for weakness. The human fleet returned to Earth. The night before the Arden's own departure, Dara stood at the observation deck again. The same deck, the same transparency, the same open space beyond it. The gas giant's rings were in a slightly different position than they had been when she first stood here, shifted by its slow orbit. The fleet was gone. The council chamber below was quiet. The political work would take years, maybe decades. There would be blocks and setbacks and the specific frustration of watching things that should be simple become complicated. She knew this. She had studied the council long enough to have no illusions about how slowly institutions changed, even after the moment that forced them to. But the moment it happened, that part was done. Arin found her there, which had not been planned by either of them. They stood for a while without talking, which was comfortable in the specific way that silence is comfortable between 2 people who have recently been honest with each other. "Does it feel like what you expected?" Arin asked. Dara thought about it genuinely. "It feels like the end of one problem and the beginning of 20 more." Arin made a sound that in Thessari indicated something between acknowledgement and amusement. "That is what governance feels like." "Yes," Dara said, "I've been told." She stayed at the window until the lights on the station's exterior shifted to their night cycle, the slow dimming that told residents it was time to sleep. Then she went inside. The Ardent would depart at first light, as much as light had meaning out here. There was already a full inbox waiting. She got to work.